I first learned, I mean, I'm a student of John Paul's work. I have read everything I can get my hands on that John Paul II has written. And I only learned, and I've been studying his work since the early 90s. I only learned of the existence of this retreat in 2016 when I was reading a book by a former professor of mine and a personal friend of John Paul II's named Stanislaw Griegel. And his book on John Paul II's thought mentioned that there was this retreat that Wojtyła gave to artists in 1962, and that it formed a single whole with the theology of the body. Well, that piqued my interest right away. I contacted a friend of mine who lives in Poland, and I said, "Do you know about this retreat?" And he said he didn't, but he could do some research for me. He found it. It's published in Polish. It hadn't been translated into any other languages. I found someone who could translate it for me into English just with a private translation, and I devoured it once I got my hands on this private translation. That was like 2017. And I knew then this has to come to the English speaking world. We contacted the Vatican. We went through all the hoops you have to go through to get the special permission to publish a work of a deceased pope and translate it more officially into a different language. We did all that work, and we are so happy and delighted to be presenting for the very first time in English this marvelous hidden gem of the great St. John Paul II called God is Beauty. It's just marvelous. And here we are in Lent. This retreat was given in 1962 during Holy Week, and that is very significant. So, and I want to add this: it is directed specifically to artists, but I let me quote from the back cover of the book. Not all of us are called to be artists in the specific sense of the term, Karol Wojtyła says. Yet, as Genesis has it, all men and women are entrusted with the task of crafting their own life to make it a work of art. So this is applicable to all of us because we're all called to be the artists of our own life, and that is to become saints. And this retreat can help us all to do precisely that, to become saints.
St. John Paul II's his letter of artists to artists is quite well known, but his own work as an artist is, there's been times when some of his plays have been performed or filmed, but right now I'm not really hearing too much about it, but I really like to see that come more to the forefront as well. I mean, the fact that this man was an artist himself, and that really comes out, especially in part 2 of this 5-part, in these 5 reflections by John Paul II. I think that most of all, it comes out in that part where he really gets into the details of the experience of the artist.
Yes, I agree. It is very important that we understand, before John Paul II even entered seminary, he was an artist. He was resisting communism through the Rhapsodic Theater in Poland.
Yeah.
And he could have been killed for what he was doing. And isn't it fascinating that of all of the attempts to resist tyranny, this young future saint chose the arts? It's fascinating. And here, let's fast forward to 1962, and communists, the Nazis left in the mid-40s, and in come the communists. Wojtyła is now a priest. He's then a bishop. It's 1962. Communists are still ruling Poland. And this retreat he gave to artists during Holy Week of 1962 was an act of resistance of tyranny. Wojtyła understood that if he could empower artists, that this was an act of resistance of tyranny. Isn't it interesting that when tyrants take over a culture, they typically put to death the artists? Why is this? Because the tyrants understand that the artists are the ones who keep the culture alive. And if you're trying to destroy a culture, you have to destroy the artists of that culture. So Wojtyła this is an act of defiance of tyranny to give a retreat to the artists of Poland in 1962 when they are under communist rule. We have to understand that. The tyrants will either kill the artists or they will manipulate the artists to serve their own propaganda. Wojtyła understood all of these dynamics, and in the midst of this, he is preaching the gospel to artists. He is calling these artists to holiness so that their art can be a means of cultural resistance. It is very important that we understand that context.
I think that it's in, I think it might be in his book, Rise, Let Us Go on Our Way, that he said that Poland at a number of times had survived for quite a long time without having a political state.
Yes.
Because it survived as the nation was in the culture.
Yes, the culture
and I think
was
he talks
kept
about
alive
that
by handing on, among other things, language and the arts. This is critical. This is critical to keeping a culture alive. And we can apply the same to what's going on, Thomas, in our own day, when ever so rapidly we are under tyranny. There is an ideology being promoted in a tyrannical way in our society, and it's using propaganda to do that, the manipulation of artists. If we can reach artists with the truth of what it means to be human, and artists come alive with the truth of what it means to be human, then their art can bring about a renaissance, a renewal, an evangelization. And pope after pope after pope in the modern world has said, we cannot evangelize without artists. Art is absolutely indispensable to the communication of the gospel message. And that's why Wojtyła gave so much of his time to forming and shaping artists, including this retreat.